Thanks for watching Coping with COVID-19. I'm Haley Wooden. Today we're going to talk about real estate and what's happening in the Metro Vancouver market. My guest today, a familiar voice and face to many who have been avid listeners of our podcasts and of our videos, Jason Turcotte, Vice President of Development at Cressey Development Group. Jason, nice to see you. Hope you're doing well, and thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, I am, and thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
So on the show, we've been talking so much about how various industries are coping with COVID. Tell me what's happening with real estate in the Metro Vancouver market.
Well, it's been interesting to say the least. I think as as a real estate company in this city, we've been we've been grappling with issues on multiple fronts. Certainly as a landlord, both in commercial and residential real estate, dealing with a whole variety of issues of trying to manage our way through this crisis on that front, and then also on the new development side of both new rental projects and condominium projects, trying to figure out how to operate in this new world of doing things remotely and trying to get a sense of the depth of both of those markets as in these kind of obviously uncharted waters that we're in.
Absolutely. A couple of things that I want to pick up on. First, generally speaking, there's been quite a number of government policies at various levels aimed at supporting, say, renters. Now, or more recently, we've seen some support around commercial tenants. What does the industry kind of make of the government response to date?
Well, I'll start by saying that I am thankful that I have not that I'm not the one making these decisions on from a political perspective. These are unprecedented decisions that they're having to make, and I certainly appreciate the complexity behind them and the need to be decisive and to help people out. I mean, we certainly acknowledge that, but it hasn't been without its challenges, to private business. I mean, if you could appreciate for a moment that as private landlords, we are a private business, and not unlike a grocery store or any of the other businesses that are trying to find their way through, but we have been placed with this burden of sort of having our hands tied a little bit with being told, as an example, you can't evict somebody for not paying rent, which is obviously the one tool that we sort of have to deal with people that don't pay rent. And not that that's something you want to do on a knee-jerk reaction in a crisis like this, but it has posed some real challenges as an industry on, well, how do we handle this? So the way we've gone about it is really just trying to take a very proactive approach with all tenants, both commercial and residential, and make sure that they're informed of the various funding options that they have through the various levels of government, whether it be federal, provincial, the rent subsidy, all of that, and just getting out ahead of it. And it has proven to be effective. And by and large, I have to say, most folks have been very, very honorable in how they've approached this. They've been honest and hardworking, and what we thought could have been a much more significant problem has not materialized much because, like I said, people have been really, really great to work with as our tenants on both the commercial and residential side.
That's really good to hear. I know one thing we've heard from both the provincial government in BC and the federal government has been for landlords, if the programs aren't enough to help them, for them to really work with their lenders and private industry to meet any needs not met by government. What kinds of or forms of support have you seen from the lending side, and has that also been a pretty productive relationship during this time?
Yeah, that hasn't been a piece of that we've dealt with too much directly. I know that some of the tenants who have debt obligations on their businesses, have certainly gone down that avenue. It's a web that we're still sort of untangling, and it has been one that seems to have been more like a bigger problem on the commercial side. The residential folks have been really great, and I think maybe because the funding has been more straightforward, and not everybody has had the unfortunate circumstance of losing their income too. So people who are still earning a paycheck have managed to continue to pay their rent. But for businesses that really do rely on month-over-month business, particularly small retailers, being told to shut down has been devastating. And so that's been a problem. And so we're working through those on a case-by-case basis with our tenants, and it's not a one size fits all. It's a different circumstance for each of them, and we're optimistic that most of these businesses will find their way through it, and ultimately it may take some time, but we'll figure out how to make everything right with some time.
Yeah, definitely going to take some time for that restart, which we're all looking forward to next week to see how that plays out in BC. I know one sector that doesn't necessarily need to restart the way, say, restaurants are, is construction that has been allowed to proceed in BC throughout our public health crisis, but has that side of things, the development sort of in progress, been impacted at all?
Yeah, we were fortunate to be able to continue on with some extra precautions, and those extra precautions certainly have had a little bit of an impact on the rate at which we're able to do the work. Certainly some extra distancing, things like wiping down tools and making sure that we don't have more than a certain number of people in a hoist or an elevator. Also, they all have an impact on schedule, which has been the number one issue. And certainly at the beginning, I think when people were still trying to wrap their heads around how severe this issue was, and there was still a lot of misinformation out there, we did see body counts on our construction sites dip considerably for the first couple of weeks. And then I think people got comfortable with the new measures that have been put into place, the extra precautions. And also there was a sense of relief that, I'm still able to go to work and get a paycheck, and I can do it in a safe environment. And so we've actually seen the production level pick back up a bit, which is encouraging.
Do you think some of those health and safety and numbers measures might be here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future? Is that the sense you get?
Yeah, I don't see those going away anytime soon, and frankly, some of it's probably a good thing to stay with us beyond even this. Just extra precautions around making sure that we're always thinking about people's health and wellness at all workplaces, including construction sites. Certainly, there's a culture in construction of grin and bear it, and a toughness that is associated with that, and we need to make sure that even in that type of an industry, we're always being mindful of people's health and safety.
I know that when we have you on the show, we talk a lot about supply and the issues around supply, and obviously those issues haven't gone away. But when it comes to developers' appetite, say, to carry risk throughout what we know can be a fairly long development process, has that been impacted at all when we look sort of at the situation our economy might be in the short, medium, or maybe longer term?
Yeah, that's a great point you make. I mean, it's been maybe the most discussed topic in our office and with folks at City Hall, et cetera, is that we've operated in an environment here that probably spans the better part of 20 years, where because of the robust nature of this real estate market and how predictable and consistent it has been, where it's been a relatively low risk, and I put air quotes around low risk because there's certainly still a lot of risk involved, but not like today. We were starting to get into a higher risk environment before COVID, but then when you start to bring in something like this that we don't even know what the outcome is going to be, we don't know what the outcome could be on things like shutdowns of sites. That's a risk. If in fact this had gotten worse, or we see a second wave, all of these types of things have now put that risk level, which we would say, relatively speaking, had been at an all-time low for the better part of 20 years, into a much, much higher place. So developing property today of all sorts, whether it be office, rental, retail, all of it, right across the board, condominium as well, is at a higher risk, and we're needing to communicate through to the other stakeholders that we deal with, particularly at City Hall, is that we need some of these handcuffs that have been placed on us removed, and whether that be about added cost measures, burdens of improving neighborhood infrastructures, or covenants that we get saddled with restricting tenures and all these types of things. Those things all worked okay, and we were able to absorb them as an industry when we felt like there was a relatively low risk. So some of the reward or the potential for reward was being mitigated consciously at City Hall. But as an industry, we tolerated it to a degree because it came with that generally that lower risk. And I think that dynamic is certainly altered significantly now, and we do need our folks at City Hall to recognize the new environment that we're working in, and we need to cut some of the red tape. We need to work through some of the bureaucracy so that we have better options, and we can be a little more nimble and a little more responsive to changes that we can't possibly anticipate right now.
Cutting that red tape and that bureaucracy, of course, was a pretty pressing issue before. Do you think those concerns from the industry might be a little more better received during the pandemic just because we have that increase in level of risk?
Yeah, we certainly seem to have the ears, and I think there's also a collective understanding at the political levels, municipally and within the walls of City Hall, that it will be construction that pulls our economy out of the quote unquote recession. Because certainly we are in hard times now, and we have some yet to come, I suspect. And construction has always been a major piece, the largest piece of our GDP in this province, particularly, and it will be what pulls us out of this. The number I hear often thrown around is 40% of people in this province are employed either directly or indirectly in construction of some manner. And so cities across the board, I think all levels of government are recognizing that, and the need to facilitate construction. And I think rental housing is probably going to be at the forefront of that, and figuring out ways that we can create an environment where, as developers, we can tolerate those risks and move projects forward, because we're going to need housing, and we also are going to need jobs. And those two things, are going to be what kickstarts the economy when it's time.
On the topic of jobs, we've been talking a lot about BIV, people who have lost their jobs, who may not have jobs to return to, even though the economy might start to reopen. What kind of impact might that have on activity in real estate? Are there any indicators we can look to sort of chart out where demand might be?
Yeah, and that's why I made the point about rental housing, and not that I have a crystal ball by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's safe to assume that there will be an impact on people's incomes, people's credits, people's risk tolerance. And so what that tells me in a more general sense is that there will be an emphasis on renting versus owning potentially. I could be wrong, but I think it's the safer bet. Obviously, if qualifying for mortgages because you've had some financial troubles, or frankly have used up the savings that you might have used for a down payment to carry you through some tougher times, is going to increase the likelihood that somebody's next choice is to rent versus buy. And if we start doing that, even if that needle only moves 5%, with the limited, with vacancies basically at zero here, that 5% has a meaningful impact on supply and demand in our market. And there's certainly a bit of a pause on new people coming to the province now. But one thing I think we need to recognize is when we get through this, we've gotten through it as well as anybody on the globe. As far as a jurisdiction in British Columbia, we were already one of the places, I think, on a lot of people's pin boards as a place they'd love to relocate to for a whole number of reasons, which we're really familiar with. But then this is just one more. Our healthcare system, our governments, they all stepped up and handled this in a way that is almost second to none across the world. And so we've given people yet another reason to want to come here. And if that needle moves even 5%, when we start looking down the road, a year and a half, 2 years, which is sort of I think the time horizon where we might feel comfortable that we're sort of, we got a bit of space between this issue and current day, we could see a real pinch if we aren't able to get supply continuing to happen and then really meaningfully increase over the next 18 months.
That's a good point. A final question for you, Jason. Maybe it's a bit of a crystal ball question, maybe not, but we're working from home, we're shopping from home, we're entertaining ourselves at home. Do you think we might see more of a shift to buying real estate at home? Any trends by way of that?
Yeah, I think that there will be some lasting impacts of this in terms of consumer behavior in every market. But real estate for sure is seeing some accelerated trends towards things happening online. And so what we've recently done is launched lease-up campaign. We're right in the middle of it right now, of a new rental building that we've just finished off. And we have, I think as of this morning, we have 65 signed leases of a new rental building, and not one person has physically stepped foot on the property.
Wow.
Which to me is quite remarkable. It speaks a little bit to the fact that there's still quite a demand. And that people are getting comfortable with the use of technology really quickly. And so we're seeing this not just in rental, but we're seeing this happen in resale with realtors using virtual tours. And there's different platforms starting to emerge now to be able to, basically host a virtual open houses. Some of these technologies and these initiatives were starting to happen anyways, and we've been having conversations about, do you think you could sell a tower or completely online? These conversations were happening. What this has done is just accelerated everything significantly, and both in terms of developing the technologies and in a consumer's willingness to accept them. And it's happening at a pretty rapid pace right now, and it's really interesting to watch. And I do think that it will forever change how people shop, for sure. There's going to be a lasting impact.
Interesting. Jason, as always, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on with your insight.
Oh, thank you.
That's Jason Turcotte, Vice President of Development at Cressey Development Group. Thanks so much for watching Coping with COVID-19. We'll be back with a new video tomorrow.